We have $37 trillion in debt. If we were to take pallets of $100 bills and stack them all up, we would be talking physical objects larger than skyscrapers worth of paper money.
Is gold going to go back to, $1,400? Is it going to go back to $2,000?
Absolutely not.
It's absolutely not going to go back down.
That's right.
Why can I say that with such conviction? I don't think anyone's going to change our human behavior.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Bullion Standard Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. Charlie, today is Friday, November 7th, 2025. This episode will be very timely. I believe we'll be publishing this episode tomorrow, Saturday, November 8th. And we have a lot to talk about today. Kind of the high-level overview for today's discussion is the fact that people might be having a little bit of erosion of trust around our currency, the dollar.
You're very modest with that analysis. I think we've lost massive amounts of trust. Massive amounts of trust.
I say this with a bit of caution because we have this thing called the monthly inflation report, the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. This is generally a measure of inflation. But one of the topics we want to talk about today is that this might not be representative of what is actually going on and what the true reduction in purchasing power is. Obviously, for the past few months now, the CPI has been between 2 and 3%. But if we look back over a 5-year period, it's very obvious that something doesn't really seem right with that. I don't know about you, Charlie. I think we've talked about in a prior episode how my purchasing power doesn't feel like it's only been reduced by that amount per year going back 5 years.
Is this why we hear people call it the CP lie?
The CP lie. That's
CP
right.
lie.
The CP lie is not indicative of the CPI. So we have $37 trillion in debt. This is a number so monumentally behemoth that I wouldn't be able to put in perspective how large that is. If we were to take pallets of $100 bills and stack them all up, we would be talking, physical objects larger than skyscrapers worth of paper money. And so this is something that is truly enormous to think about. A 37 with 12 zeros after it. That's a really big number. We want to talk about the fact that the dollar, since the creation of the Federal Reserve, has lost almost all of its purchasing power in the high 90s. And so some might say, well, how could it lose any more? Well, it could lose a lot more from here, just as it lost a lot more up into the 1970s, and then it lost more than half.
In fact, the trajectory is for the loss of the purchasing power of the dollar, devaluation of the dollar to speed up from here.
Correct.
The alternative would be for everyone to experience even more tough times than they're already experiencing. I don't think our politicians, again, we've said this before, I don't think our politicians are willing to sacrifice their political careers to create a pause in the spend, a pause in the money creation collectively, sufficiently to where we would not have a speeding up of the depreciation of the purchasing power of fiat currencies across the globe. We would all have to get together and say, I choose short-term sacrifice. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt bad. And so then and only then we might say, okay, well, that's now after a certain amount of time of some, responsible monetary policy, we might say trust could be rebuilt in the dollar.
That's right.
Or nobody's voting for that anytime soon. In fact, we're voting the opposite. It's my belief that this thing we call human nature, called a conundrum, the human conundrum is such that when we see someone at the top, I like to call it the ivory tower, we compare ourselves against that person at the top as an automatic reaction. For someone who has squirreled away a couple more nuts for the wintertime, and more than we have, we might, have a little automatic reaction. It's a natural human reaction. Some might call it the jealousy reaction. Some might call it the it's not fair reaction. We all do it. And we all say, why is it that I'm over here and I've only got one nut? And that person over there, they have 2 nuts for the winter. And so, I think that's very fair and normal to say that we're all going to have that automatic reaction. And when we're adopting the strategy of short-term gain over long-term sacrifice, even unknowingly that there's a long-term sacrifice around the corner, we're going to continue to want to vote in the ways we've been voting.
I don't see how anybody, Democrat or Republican, would choose like what we would call this bad tasting medicine, where how do we really fix this problem of perpetual money creation? And how do we really get ourselves out of this hole where we're running $2 trillion per year deficits, where inflation is creeping back up?
I have the answer. You ready? It's the perfect solution. You print more money and you get what you vote for. That's the solution. And so once people understand through experience that more money printing equals more inflation, then we have, what do we call it? Yield curve control. Then we have price controls. Then we have shortages of supply because price controls and your yield curve controls never work. And then people are like, wait a minute. I thought that with all this technology and all this fairness in the world that we could just create a utopian society where everyone gets all their needs met every time, whatever that need is. And ultimately there has never been a solution to the human conundrum of, call it greed, jealousy. It's not fair. Gold has gone up from $1,400, I can't remember when, in 2019. And now we've come off of a high of 4,400 roughly, and we're, back in the $4,000 range. Is gold going to go back to, $1,400? Is it going to go back to $2,000? Absolutely not. It's absolutely not going to go back down.
That's right.
Why can I say that with such conviction? I don't think anyone's going to change our human behavior. Absolutely 100% gold will not go back to $2,000. It's just it's not going to happen.
I agree with you.
If it does happen,
something would have to change.
Thank you. It's great. It means that we have made a correction that we've never once made before in our cultures and our societies, and it's gonna suck. And it's like we had better all take on a little extra weight on our shoulders to help ourselves and to help the people out around us, because like that, we will correct eventually, and it will be a requirement for everyone to take on as much as they can take on, because that's how we get through things.
Is it fair to say we don't have a money problem, Charlie? We have a trust problem. And once people stop believing that their currency tells the truth, they look for something that does. And hence why gold has been the Grand Slam all-star batter up this year, going all the way up to 4,400 and going, sitting now around $4,000, obviously.
Didn't you call it the truth machine once?
Gold is the truth machine. It tells no lies. Why? Because gold has the tendency to sniff out all kinds of stuff that, would otherwise kind of be a lie.
The bond market has kind of turned into a little bit of a truth machine here lately, too. Like we've got, there's some manipulation in bond markets. The Fed buys bonds. That's an artificial, it's an artificial control in the natural open market.
Yeah, the Fed gets out there, creates price action in the bond market, which influences the yield of bonds, and this could be a form of yield curve control, but that's a very specific program.
So there's a tug of war in the bond market between the open market, people who are like, I demand a little more yield, a little lower price for this, and then the Fed will come in and say, we're not going to do that, because if we allow for that, it's going to get really tragic inside of our monetary systems, and it's going to be even more tragic inside of our government financial system. So there's a lot of tension there right now. The tension has ratcheted up tenfold over the last couple of years.
There's cracks starting to develop in the system, and that's a really high-level, broad statement, because we could say all the way back in the 30s, cracks started to develop in the system when gold was confiscated and then revalued from $20.67 to $35 with the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. But cracks are really starting to form in the system here, Charlie, and I can only say that's evidenced by how the price action of gold has gone this year. We've talked about in a prior episode, it's historic. Literally, I called it a paradigm shift year. I just don't see any way other than how we will get ourselves out of this hole that we find ourselves in, running $2 trillion deficits, running multi-trillion dollar deficits, in addition to, how much money we will need to satisfy future obligations like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. The number is staggering. If we take how much money we would need to have today and, reinvest it at a certain rate of return to a net present value calculation, it's almost unbelievable how much.
100 trillion?
Yeah, it's over
150 trillion.
It's right about 100, I think between 100 and 120 trillion, depending on what interest rate you're using to do that net present value calculation. But at today's interest rate, it's certainly between 100 and 120. And this is, data the government puts out, not us. So,
by the way, we're not getting any government data today.
Yeah, we're not going
so far.
Right. So we have these periods of history. We have the gold confiscation. We have the, infamous August 15th, 1971 Nixon closing the gold window. We have the 2008 financial crisis. We have the 2020 COVID stimulus programs. With each one of these events, a little bit more trust erodes. The dollar loses a little bit more value. And to service all of our future ongoing liabilities, we have to perpetually and increase the amount of money we print. And so this goes back to the fact that, what if there was none of that available? What if that option wasn't available? Well, then it would be this thing called death by deflation, where everybody has to take their bad tasting medicine. We all have to reduce our standard of living a little bit. We all have to say, okay, this is going to get a little bit worse, and we're going to have to go through the bad times together in order to solve the problem of how to get back to stability, where we're not constantly and perpetually printing money out of thin air. And then we could go back to some kind of stable, form of money. And I don't know what that looks like, by the way. I don't think it would be a gold-backed currency, but it would be something far drastically different than it is today, where it's just the perpetual money printer.
So where do we go from here, Kyle? What do you think? I mean, as far as, like, we kind of know the cycles and how they're going to play out, and that usually the pain will continue until morale improves. So what is maybe a solution that would, that we maybe haven't looked at, that would be a little bit of clearing some things out to allow for some new growth?
I have a really good way to put this into perspective. We've talked about this before. Imagine you're in the passenger seat of a car, and Jerome Powell is the driver. Okay, you guys are
JP.
He's
just having a great time. Is he smoking a stogie?
He's got a big old stogie.
Yeah,
yep.
He's definitely smoking a stogie at this point. He's like, F it. I'm lighting this stogie.
So you guys are driving in this car together. I don't know, 100 miles an hour. You're in the desert, and you're about to drive over the lip of the Grand Canyon. Now you guys are falling down, and you look over to your left, and you go, JP, what are we going to do? We're falling to our deaths. And JP looks over at you and says, nothing to do. We're just falling. It's just a matter of time before we hit the ground.
Do you think he tried to hit the hairpin turn right before the cliff and just missed it?
No.
He's just like, that's it.
There's nothing to avoid there. There's only one direction for this thing, Charlie.
So 100 miles an hour.
So now I want to put into context. Now that time while you're falling through the air before you hit the ground and die, we don't know how much time that could be. That could be a year. That could be 5 years. Maybe this thing goes for another 100 years. I doubt it. But
I highly unlikely.
This would be the big question, and this is where I go back to death by inflation or death by deflation. So from that point of view, I think it's a matter of time. You know, we could look back in history and say, well, what other currencies out there hyperinflated away? It takes a lot to get to that point. I heard somebody give a speech one time on how Weimar Germany got hyperinflation. It was something along the lines of they increased their money supply by like 60 to 80% every year for like 6 to 8 years. And so we had a little taste of that during the COVID era, Charlie, where in 2021 we increased the money supply 30, 40%. But we, obviously tamed it off there. So would that have happened again in the U.S. if we went down that road? I don't know. Nobody really knows. But the point is this. There's really only one way out of this. I think we've talked about human psychology. I think we'll all remain the same. We're not going to change how we're operating. We'll continue to print money. We'll continue to inflate away the value of our obligations. Money will become worth less, and gold will become worth more.
We like to call it boiling the frog as well. How do you boil the frog? One QE cycle at a time.
That's right. And going back to the 2008 financial crisis, most people had an expectation that all that money would translate to a lot of inflation. We've talked about this before. That never materialized because that money stayed contained in the system. The money we recently printed up.
In the banking system?
Correct. Mm-hmm. The money, and that was one of the reasons why there was this speculative fervor. We had a blow off top in gold in 2011 and silver. Because people were very optimistic about the price and thought there was going to be a lot of inflation. That never materialized. It was actually pretty stable throughout the 2010s. We actually
the experiment worked in that case. The QE experiment, as far as inflation is concerned, there's lots of secondary consequences we could talk about. We won't need to get into those right now.
Right. It's very complex, but yeah, that money kind of stayed contained in the system. So this most recent round, though, that money got sloshed around all throughout the economy. And it's one of the reasons why we had a 9.1 or 9.2 CPI print a couple years ago in the summer. I see this quiet return to tangibility. That is the concept behind what I've talked about on 2025 being an inflection point year for precious metals. So when new systems form, when old ones break, obviously. And so trust is that big word.
Mm-hmm.
Trust is the biggest word for us at Bullion Standard. Obviously, that is the foundation of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And trust is getting chipped at. And as more time goes on, it's going to get chipped at more and more and more. What does that mean? Well, you said it best 10 or 15 minutes ago. The price of gold is not going back to $2,000. There's no way. Maybe it would in some kind of crisis in confidence or liquidity crisis in the broader market, but it would just be a buying opportunity.
That's right.
It wouldn't last.
Mm-hmm.
Would gold go back to $2,000 on a fundamental basis? Everything that we have going on right now would need to change. We would have to stop printing money. We would have to have an accurate CPI print.
We would have to have the culture change such that our demand of our politicians would trend towards austerity. I don't know about you guys out there, but I don't see any of that happening anytime soon. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Thanks for your patience as we kind of stumble through some of the things that we're talking about right now. We appreciate that. And we appreciate that, if you did get that little moment where you're like, oh, I wonder about that thing, take it on. Whatever that curiosity is, like understand it more. We're doing our best over here to understand everything more. and join the adventure with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on another Bullion Standard episode. Remember, every ounce matters, and so does every insight. Remember to stay committed to growth, stay informed, and hold your Bullion Standard high.